Well, thanks so much for being here, everyone. I'm Joy Brand Richardson. I am welcoming you to the HR peer community. I am the Vice President of Professional Development at JCC Association. And I wanted to give you a little bit of background about what we're going to be doing during this session and some housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. If you do not want to be on camera, you can keep your camera off, although I love seeing everyone's faces. So if you don't mind being on camera, that's okay. Keep your cameras on. This is the HR peer community session. If this is not where you intended to be, please return to Spot Me so that you can find the different session where you'd like to be. Joining me today is my associate, Mark S. Young, who's the director of J-Response at JCC Association. Our names appear as hosts in the chat box. If you need anything at all, please chat us privately so that we can help you navigate the system. We aspire here at JCC Association, we aspire to help every person feel like they belong at ProCon 21. And so we are working to build inclusive spaces in which every person feels welcome, respected, safe, and fully included. And to that end, we encourage you to consider the following suggestions. You may rename yourself in your Zoom box to include your agency or your JCC, and also your pronouns if you'd like to put in your personal pronouns. We've also enabled closed captioning. You have the option to turn it off by clicking on the button at the bottom of the toolbar. Please reach out to me or to Mark if there's anything we can do to enhance your learning experience. We're thrilled to be able to offer this program, this entire JCC professional conference at no cost to JCCs because of the generous sponsorship from our sponsors and vendors. And each sponsor really feels strongly about the work that JCCs are doing across the United States and Canada and across the world. We hope you'll show them your appreciation by supporting them and visiting the vendor booths during the virtual vendor hall. You'll have that opportunity a couple of times throughout the conference, and you can also chat with them in the chat feature. They're all listed on the Spot Me platform. To get us started in our session, I'd like to introduce Tracy Thompson, the HR director at the Kings Bay Y and the Shorefront Y. Both are in Brooklyn. She shares her time equally with both JCCs, and Tracy is also a member of our ProCon planning community. In just a minute, I'm going to ask you all a question or two that you can put into the chat, and then I'm going to ask Tracy to introduce our speakers. So to just shake it up a little bit, get us all into the mood of responding, I'd like to know from you, what positive situation have you found that being virtual and being hybrid over the last 12 months has gotten for you? So in the chat box, let us know what's been positive for you about what's happening in the chat, in your virtual world. No commute, I love that. Me too. What else has been positive? Opportunities to do deeper work, allowing to have more time with our teenage girls. Isn't that wonderful to have more time? Pajama pants. Who's wearing pajama pants right now? I bet a few of us are. More time at home, better communication with staff. We've been intensely communicating with our staff, connected quicker to managers on Teams. Absolutely. Teams has been really helpful in our work as well. Some people have been in person the entire time and learning new technologies to be in person and work with their teams who are still remote. The ability to connect with staff who are remote and in person is very important. And I can see that some of us have also been people who are juggling work and commuting and also being at home and doing virtual schooling with their children. And many people have been less distracted. So that's great. Thanks for adding all of those wonderful things. I see we have over 70 people joining us today. Thanks so much for being here. Technology has improved. It's wonderful that we can do so much with the technology that has been just trying so hard to keep up with the work that we're doing. So at this time, I'd like to have Tracy introduce our panelists and get our session started. Take it away, Tracy.
Thank you. Hi, all. It's so great to be with you all today. I'm really thrilled for us to be together learning about
Tracy, hang on 1 second.
Just unmute yourself, Tracy, and then
Somehow you got on mute again.
Is that better?
Much better.
perfect.
Okay.
Great. Sorry. Well, hi, all. Take two. I'm so thrilled to be together learning about virtual hiring, which is a topic the planning team and the peer community was interested in learning more about. Thank you to the Society of Human Resources Management for helping us bring this panel to life, including Mary Chetty, who's here with us today. Thank you, Mary. We have 4 amazing panelists to talk about virtual hiring today, and who are also volunteer lay leaders with Society for Human Resource Management. First, we have Jen Tolbert, Senior Vice President of Clover, a brand new organization that focuses on developing an intelligent video interview solution that delivers a better and more equitable hiring experience for both candidates and interviewers. Jen will talk about making the transition to virtual hiring. Next, we have Crystal Granger, Human Resources Benefit Manager at Harsh Investment Properties in Portland, Oregon. Crystal will talk to us about strengthening the virtual interview experience. Next, we have Jeff Luttrell, Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Alorica, a business process outsourcing company based in Irvine, California, who will share how we can conduct virtual hiring through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. And last but not least, we have Jeremy York, Senior Certified Professional from Society of Human Resource Management and also a Senior Professional in Human Resources. He's the lead consultant and president of Invigorate HR, a human resource consultant firm specializing in the alignment of people and business. He will share insights on virtual onboarding and how we could keep the candidates engaged throughout this process. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I'll pass the mic back over to Mark Young, who will ask questions formally to each panelist. Thank you all.
Tracy, thank you so much. Thank you to you and many other HR professionals on this call and not on this call that help bring these sessions together. And Tracy specifically asked for virtual hiring. So very excited to have this wonderful panel. We're going to start with Jen. And Jen, let me just add a spotlight to you and I'll remove mine. Each panelist is going to have about 5 minutes to present. And then we're going to have time for Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A after each 5-minute presentation. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms. So if there's one presenter or topic that you want to go deeper into, we'll have time for that as well. That's the plan for the hour and a half or so. So Jen, making the transition to virtual hiring, which many of us have had to do, perhaps even unexpectedly over the last year. How do we do this, especially, and also how do we train our hiring managers to do so? Thank you for joining us, Jen.
Yes, absolutely. It's so wonderful to meet everybody, and thanks so much for the opportunity to hang out for a little bit. And boy, yes, talk about a transition. It's nothing like a pandemic hitting, and all of a sudden we all have to screech to a halt and change gears. You know, I actually, as you mentioned at the beginning, did that in a huge way because I was working for a large software company and made the decision to join a new company called Clover's. And we're actually building this whole company right now completely virtual. So it's definitely possible. And in some ways, as some of the comments have already said, you can definitely be more focused and there's a lot of advantages to making that happen. But specifically, let's talk about your question, Mark, and what does that mean when it comes to actually equipping your interviewing team, making that transition to having virtual training? So I'm going to share a couple of slides here with you. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that you are seeing a pretty green round slide right now?
Perfect, Jen.
Awesome, great. So let's talk a little bit. You know, we spend a lot of time, I think, trying to find candidates and trying to get the right people to actually interview. Oftentimes, though, we may struggle a bit more when it comes to actually equipping your virtual interviewers to be prepared for that. So here's some points. We could talk more about details when we get into the actual workshop afterwards if you're interested. But there's a couple of things I really thought was important to call out. And the first is this is a really great time to revisit your hiring practices and what you've done traditionally in JCC. And as you're looking to potentially move to a virtual environment, look at those practices and see what has worked well and maybe what you want to transition or what you want to switch. It's a great time to be able to actually make that sort of transition and really examine that. Now, if you have interviewing teams, you may be a one-person shop when it comes to actually doing the interviewing. It applies as well. But make sure that there's context with your team around why we're doing interviews the way we're doing and why we're transitioning to this. Really ensuring that people understand how to interview, not only virtually, but in general is super, super important. So coming prepared, if you have the opportunity in advance of the virtual interview to research your candidate, to know a little bit about them prior to the interview when it's appropriate, it makes a huge difference. Now, obviously, if you're doing mass camp hiring, this may not be realistic, but when you can, it helps. Make sure you're clear also on which role you're interviewing for. I actually had the experience where I was a candidate and I was being interviewed, and about halfway, 4 or 5 questions into the interview, I'm sitting there scratching my head thinking, this didn't really sound like what I thought it was. And they had the wrong questions that they were interviewing me for. And that definitely isn't a good impression for JCC. So something to be aware of for that. Something else to consider is if you do have other people that are interviewing, maybe they're just hiring people occasionally, create some sort of shared space where you can actually share information together. And that could be something if you have an internal website or something that you're sharing, between the team internally. Use that to do things like put interview guides out there for them. Put tips like this deck right here out there. A list of questions per role is huge. That way it's helping guide them on what questions to ask based on the different positions that they're hiring for. And anything else that you can think of that will be specifically helpful, your mission, your themes for them to review. In addition, if you can create an area where people can ask questions and you can socialize challenges that they might be facing, super important and super helpful. Something else I think that's incredibly helpful is to do a dry run. Not everybody is used to interviewing virtually. So if you have a chance, do some role playing. You be the candidate, have the hiring manager be the hiring manager, and get online and actually walk through it so that you're comfortable with what that looks like. And the last tip that I just want to highlight right now for the interviewing team is to have fun. Relax and enjoy the experience. There was another interview that I was in a while back where at the beginning of the interview, I was talking to the hiring manager and his little girl comes running in and she's dressed like a princess and she hops up on his lap and she's got chocolate all over her face and she hands him a Snickers bar and says, "Here, Dad." And he embraced it. He said, "Thank you so much." And he points to the camera and he said, "This is Jen." And so he introduces me to his daughter. She runs off and I was like, this is amazing. First of all, I see a lot about what a cool guy this is. But secondly, it really helped me to feel more comfortable as we were moving forward with it. So we'll talk more if you're interested in joining the breakout session on some things to do during the interview and how you can help your candidates actually be prepared. But just to sum it up for right now, I really wanted to take just a minute and talk about some of the benefits of video technology that are really helpful. Number one, some of you guys already mentioned it, huge time savings, right? No driving, all the things that everybody's been posting in the chat, very, very helpful. But the other thing that I think is super fantastic about video hiring is that you have the ability to actually record the interviews, and there's huge benefit in that. One of those being a fantastic way to help you look at yourself and how you interview, but also coach others and help them improve things like awareness of unconscious bias that they may have, or coaching how they're doing their interviews, how they're timing their interviews, what questions they may be asking, how they're answering those questions or asking those questions, even down to coaching around ensuring they are doing things like making eye contact and looking at the camera. All those things are super helpful as you're really preparing your team for that. So to sum it up, there's some great benefits in virtual hiring and a great opportunity for you to be able to review your hiring practices and tweak accordingly. That's it for me, Mark.
Jen, thank you so much. I'll just remove your
Stop
spotlight.
sharing here.
Yeah, stop sharing your screen. And we'll go back to a gallery view here. And I'm going to bring up, let me just so you can see, let's see, spotlight for everyone. Now you can see me. And thank you so much, Jen, for that, setting the stage around transitioning to virtual hiring. I'm now gonna take us across the country to Crystal in Portland and add your spotlight. Crystal, you're also gonna be sharing a little bit more about virtual interviewing and transitioning to a virtual hiring space. So Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you to ProCon for having me. This is such an opportunity, and I'm excited to be in this space with you for this hour that we have together. So like Jen talked about, she really was giving HR practitioners like yourselves the advice to transitioning to the virtual platform. And I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes and a little bit more time in our breakout sessions to talk about the candidate experience for that, because just like you guys, the candidates are probably interviewing virtually for the first time as well. So when we think about the candidate life cycle, I just want to briefly touch on job postings, right? So again, you guys are probably masters by now posting jobs to a virtual platform. I'm not sure if that's through an HRIS system or through your websites, but from a candidate's perspective, I'm going to focus on the span of generations that you guys are working with. And Generation Z, they probably have access to the job platforms on their iPhones compared to boomers who probably don't have that access. And so trying to find equity in job postings to virtual platforms, one tip that I thought I'd share is to meet the candidates where they're at, right? So if you're going to post to a virtual platform, especially for that boomer generation, maybe you also want to post to online news journals or magazines that communities might be interested in, and try to create a more diverse candidate reach through posting at platforms where the candidates might be. After job postings, we're looking at applications. So again, as hiring managers, there's online platforms for applications, but what if a boomer, for example, doesn't know how to access that online platform to fill out that application? Well, I was thinking of other resources that you could provide to, again, meet the candidate where they're at. And if you email out an application to a candidate, because I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that boomers, can access their email. Try not to email fillable PDF forms, because most people on their home computers don't have the software to fill those in. So if you email applications, maybe even put the application in the body of an email so they can just respond to the specific questions in that body. So things like that, compared to, a Generation Z, they've been doing school online for the last year, if not a little bit longer. So they, I'm sure, have the technology either on their school computers or can figure it out. I will say, in my own role as a benefit manager, one transition that I made for people who just lack the technology in general, right? Like, let's think about the access behind everybody having internet at their fingertips. I'm in an office role, so that makes a lot more sense compared to maybe some of my HVAC maintenance people who are out in the field, like, doing the work. So what I've done is I've transitioned from, like, if I need a form from them, I will say, you can print this out and fill it out and just take a picture and send it to me, right? So, like, trying to find and trying to provide your candidates with different methods to get you the information that you're looking for, and just being flexible with what that looks like. I'm not saying, to change your practices or your standards, but just find different methods so candidates have access to applying for these jobs. And then the meat of the conversation is the interviews. So like Jen was saying, there's lots of technology out there. I'm sure a handful of you, if not all of you at once, has started an interview and you were on mute and you thought you were chatting away, and all of a sudden, like, someone had to politely tell you, oh, hey, you're on mute. So again, going back to those, that span of the generations that you work with, boomers might not have the technology experience to do an online virtual interview. So much like Jen was saying, for HR practitioners, maybe provide a guide to your candidates when they get to that interview stage on how to download technology, how to start their video, how to unmute, and then again, maybe meeting them where they're at. And maybe if they're, like, my recommendation is that if the job that they're applying for doesn't include technology or the use of, Zoom, for example, then a phone interview is okay. And or if you're in a place in the country or in Toronto where they're doing in-person interviews, again, maybe the older generation, the boomers, are much more comfortable with that process compared to, again, Gen Z, where they've been doing their school online. So they're very familiar with online platforms. They're very familiar with, having their video on. So just think about those things when interviewing, like meeting them where they're at and providing some guidelines up front. I think another thing to take into consideration and something that you want to prep your candidates on is understanding that when we're doing a virtual interview, you're coming into their space, right? So some really quick and dirty tricks is to let them know like their background should be clear and or as uncluttered, or if there's something in their background that they don't want you to see, to try to think about where they're going to place their video and how to remove those things, because you don't want them to get the wrong impression. But I really loved what Jen was saying, right? Like, just be flexible. If someone's dog is barking in the background during their interview and they have to excuse themselves to like get that dog a treat, that's okay, right? Because we're in a space that we've never been in together. And I feel like making the candidate as comfortable as possible during this process is only going to make your interviewing experience that much better. I just have a couple notes down here, so I'm sorry I'm looking away. I think one thing that was mentioned early on in the chat, one of the beautiful parts of going virtual during COVID was learning new technology. So, I know that not all HR practitioners, especially if you're a department of one, can really like walk someone through how to set up Zoom on their home computer or how to call in and use a meeting ID and maybe the password feature if you're doing a phone interview. But I think having that grace and building that community within your, JCCs is important, and providing those tips and tricks, maybe sending them a YouTube video or something where they can try to learn new technology, because that will only enhance the interview for both parties. And then I think, again, like recommending to your interviewees to do a dry run. If they do download the software, they can always do a dry run with their spouse or with their children or with their neighbor, just to make sure that they understand how the platform works. I feel like in interviews that I've been in, it breaks my heart when someone, can't figure out their video and they take up 15 minutes trying to figure it out, but just finding grace with people, because this is so new to a lot of us. And then again, just remembering that you are going into their space during virtual interviews. So you just want to be mindful and try to prepare them for that, because I don't think people realize that, when they set up their computer, that you're actually coming into their space and they're going to see, the unmade bed, if they're in a studio condo like me. So things that they have to prepare in advance for the interview, not just themselves, which is what we used to bring into the workspaces, but much more. So I'm excited to continue the conversation in my breakout room. Thank you so much, Mark.
Crystal, thank you so much. And just a quick comment to both you and to Jen. How can we be on the side of the candidate, right? Even though we are interviewing them for a position at our JCC, because it's such a, a change in the interviewing experience and the hiring experience, how can we coach them, and how is that okay? So, and I bet I'm just seeing some of the comments, finding grace. This is really resonating with a lot of our community. So Crystal, thank you so much. I will remove your spotlight and I'm going to add Jeff Luttrell. Now, Jeff, this is actually going to dovetail on our session tomorrow as well. Not only do we want to be more proficient and excellent in the virtual hiring space, we want to make sure that we are attracting the best candidates and the most diverse candidates, and making sure our hiring is on a DEI, or a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. Can you talk a little more about that, especially in concert with virtual hiring?
Sure, yeah. And so looking at what's happened in the last 12, 14 months, last year, we probably would have had a very different conversation than we're having now. As a talent professional, you guys are probably going through the same things that my teams are going through all over the country, where it's getting harder to recruit now, correct? People have options. They've got government financial assistance and stimulus money and all sorts of things that are coming in. So it's getting harder and harder to recruit. The company that I work for, Alorica, we had brick and mortar locations, just like many of you. And we had to build pipelines in each market. We had HR and talent acquisition recruiters on site. And with COVID, all of that went virtually. And we had to figure out how to build those pipelines virtually, but then also with the lens that we want to ensure that we've got that diverse pool. So it was challenging at first, right? Trying to figure out how we continue to have partnerships with organizations when we're not physically in those locations, or maybe they physically are not there. So, and I'm sorry, there's some kickback in the room. Can you guys hear that?
If you are not on mute, make sure to mute yourself. And Jeff, why don't you continue? I'll try to figure that out.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. It was it distracted me for a second and I lost my train of thought. So we really had to pay a lot of attention on how we do partnerships, because that's a big part of how we build a diverse pipeline. Those organizations in each of our markets and even nationally that can help us ensure that we have a diverse pool. So those people, organizations that assist and work with people of color, the aging workforce, even millennials, whatever it might be, to ensure that we've got those partnerships in the COVID world, and even right now, where many of them are still not operating normally, right? They're most of them are virtually. They may not be having the events and the things that they had in the past. So we had to really look at how we maintain those, how we build the partnerships, and it's been a lot of legwork finding out the best way to reach them. How do we find new organizations that can fill in? So we worked, especially with groups like yours, synagogues, churches, community centers. Were really good about helping get our message and our positions out to all the different communities, and has been one of the best. So that is a tip, and that's a no cost, because I'm always, my budget's very tight. So I'm always looking for no cost ways or low cost ways to continue to build our pipelines. So partnerships were a big one. We also were able to sponsor a lot of events. So I encourage you to look at opportunities to sponsor and support other groups in your community. We looked at our ads, where we placed them, how we placed them. Crystal hinted a little bit about going where they are. That's exactly what we had to do. So whenever we had digital ads, I needed to change and adjust. Maybe it's not on a CNN news site. If we're doing a digital ad, maybe we're adjusting it and putting it on AARP website or something along those lines. We also had to look at things like our Google optimization. Sometimes, like if I'm looking for a job, I would put in for Google and enter customer service job or whatever. So we really did play on using Google and other search engines to help us build our pipeline, as well as social media. Social media has been a huge part of our success in not only building a pipeline, but making it be a diverse pool, because you are able to target communities, areas, people with like interests, and it's really been helpful for us. Now I will share, Facebook recently announced, I think it was yesterday or today, they're making some changes to, and you have to opt in to revealing certain parts of your information. So that may change soon, and we may have to adjust our strategy a little bit again. The last big one for us has been referrals. And those are not only from employees. We use a lot of different sources outside of our own employee base. So it may be that I reach out and say, Mark, we're really looking, we've got this position that's critical, and we're looking to have a really diverse population. Who might you know in your network? So a lot of our recruiters started using their own networks to help build our pipelines. Now, it's getting more and more challenging. So I think we have to constantly stay in front of it and start being more and more creative, because as the market gets tighter and people have more options, we're having to get more creative what we do. And so we are doing things, we're able to offer equipment. That's been something to help with the access part. Many people may or may not have access to a computer. And that's something that we didn't really think of when we started recruiting virtually. But we've had to start, do we offer some kind of allowance? Do we provide headsets? Do we help with internet? Because everybody doesn't have the same internet access everywhere. So those are just a couple of the things that you guys can learn more about in the breakout room with me. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you.
Jeff, thank you so much. And I think so much you said that was really resonant. I'm taking away immediately the idea of partnerships. Who can we partner with that will enable us to create exposure to a host of new communities that can bring great talent that we wouldn't even be attracting if not for that partnership. So one of many great things that you said, and I think was also a nice transition to Jeremy. So let me remove your spotlight, Jeff, and let me add Jeremy York, our final speaker, before we get to a little Q&A. And as everyone on this call knows, hiring and getting them, to selecting them is only part of the process. We have to make sure they have a successful onboarding experience that is now more and more being done virtually, so that talent stays and is happy and is retained. So Jeremy, can you talk a little bit about transitioning and having excellent practices in the virtual onboarding space?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for having me here today. Wow, what did 2020 do to us? I mean, if we didn't have to already be familiar with technology, we had to immerse ourselves in it this last year. And a lot of clients and folks that I worked with were just kind of beside themselves and saying, hey, how do we move to a more virtual environment as it comes to onboarding, which is such a personal kind of experience for people, right? And so here's what I want to start out with. I want you to think about what we hear the term customer experience, right? When you think about that at your favorite store that you shop at, or whether it's online, whatever, it's all about that customer experience that really keeps you coming back every day, right? So I want you to think about that as you're building a virtual onboarding program, except it's about employee experience. We know in the onboarding process that we have over 50 activities that we have to complete during any type of onboarding period. And it can be quite overwhelming for people. There's a lot of information we share, a lot of documents we send, just to kind of be overwhelming for people and new folks that they're meeting, et cetera. But we want to ensure that as they're going through this whole process, that it is engaging, it's enjoyable, and most of all, we want to make sure that it's effective. So when we look at the whole onboarding process, we want to make sure that we're covering the right information. A successful onboarding process typically covers like the key information such as policies, your values, your mission, your products, your services, any of those kinds of things. Maybe an overview of the teams that someone's going to be working with, whether it's HR, administrative tasks, that good old new hire paperwork that we all love, those I-9s that have to be completed within 3 days. And any kind of software or any kind of other training. I mean, all of this stuff is happening during virtual onboarding. And we have to make sure we get it right to ensure that we're helping people be successful with all that. So we need to make sure that we are prepared and we have the right type of information available in this particular virtual process. The other thing that we have to look at is that we have to make sure that we tailor the digital information so that it has the most impact for people. Do not just send them a bunch of emails with paperwork attached and say, okay, attached is your new hire information, please complete it, get back to me. That doesn't help anyone, right? Would you want that experience, someone just to throw that at you? No, we need to continue to build that relationship with that new hire, right? So we want to adjust. Maybe it's our language for digital format. Maybe it's that we have to add more detail and more content. We have to be more creative, in our formats and how we're delivering this, right? We all know about Zoom fatigue, and we're delivering this right now via Zoom platform, right? So you don't want to sit here for an hour and a half and imagine, if every one of us, and thank goodness that are my co-panelists that we're here, we are remotely a little bit interesting. I hope you find that we are just not monotone saying absolutely nothing. You want to make it engaging. You want to make it the experience something that they want to pay attention to help eliminate Zoom fatigue, right? So you've got to look at, okay, maybe we need to have screen shares, or we need to have other kinds of additional training, online training videos, whether it's IMs or any of those kinds of things like that. So we want to make sure that we're tailoring that information to the actual digital onboarding experience. Now, another thing we want to pay attention to, as Crystal said, and I loved it, I put this in the chat, flexibility, right? We have to be as flexible as possible. And so with so many people balancing the demands of work and home life, and as we said, we are now coming into their homes to deliver this information, right? We better let new hires know that we understand what they're going through. We understand that, hey, you're managing your home life and you're trying to do your work. This is a new normal we're creating. We're trying to work through this. So consider allowing them to work through some of the onboarding materials at their own pace, right? And that you may assign them homework, or you may assign them activities, and by offering additional kinds of text resources or even instructional videos that they can browse through independently on their own. Don't make them sit on a Zoom call for 8 hours and go over all of this information. Maybe you build a program where they're spending 2 to 3 hours a day and you're covering different information over a period of time. That will help them be able to digest that information. Because one of the things that we know that we have to do and pay attention to, and this is my last point, is we've got to train new hires at a little bit slower of a pace than usual. Because it is digital, they're not here, we're not in a brick and mortar establishment, and we need to avoid putting any kind of unnecessary pressure on new employees and take it more slow than inundating them with large amounts of information, expecting them to turn it around in a day or two when all this is new, right? So we need to spread out all these onboarding tasks over the course of a week or so, maybe even 2 weeks. Create that program, find out how much time they may need to absorb, all the important information. But in my session, in my breakout, one thing that I'll say is we want to make sure that, one, we prepare, we connect, and we engage. Those are the 3 points we're trying to do in this virtual onboarding, and we'll talk more of that in that breakout session. So Mark, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And I'm not going to take the spotlight off you because we're going to go into Q&A, but there were so many things that you just said resonate with me. And let me add my spotlight so you can see me as I speak. And to end it with prepare, connect, and engage, I think is such a great rubric for us to follow. So we have about 15 minutes. We're going to do Q&A with the entire panel. You'll see me one by one add all of the panelists. And I want to thank them for their initial presentations. And I'm also going to add my wonderful colleague, Joy, who's going to facilitate the panel. And then in about 15 minutes, we'll go into breakouts if you want to spend more time with just one of these individuals and topics. So Joy, to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to our panelists. It's really great information. I love the ideas that we've been throwing around here. I'd like to see some people put questions in the chat so that we can ask them of the panelists. It can be in general, or it can be something specific for someone. And then, as Mark said, you'll have an opportunity in a few minutes after we do this general Q&A to go into a breakout room with one of these people. So here's a question. What's the best software you'd recommend for virtual hiring? Does anybody have any input or ideas about the best software you would use?
Well, I have to speak up simply because that's my business and I might get fired if I don't say something about that. But not to be an ad. There's a lot of good technology out there. The company that we have is a company called Clovers with an S, and it's so new that our website is actually going to be released in just a couple of weeks. Bottom line is it utilizes the ability for you to do virtual interviewing with the candidate, and it provides this coaching to the interviewers along the way. So sorry, Mark, if that was too much of an ad, but that was too good of a question not to answer.
It's okay.
And I'd like to add in, it's not an application software, but using a text platform has changed our world. So being able, the one that we use is called Text Recruit, but I would say it's helped us keep close with candidates. We've had to do a lot of keep warm activity and reminders, and it's changed the game for us.
If I can add one more thing that isn't specifically about Clovers, but Jeff, it's a good point you made, and something that I think is super important is whatever you use what you are currently in your current process. So if you use Zoom for that virtual hiring. If you use Teams, use what you are comfortable with, and it decreases a lot of the stress for you as you're moving through that process.
Terrific. I know that a lot of our HR people on this Zoom with us today have other staff at their JCC who do some of these interviews as well. It might be the aquatics director hiring the lifeguards, or it might be the camp director interviewing for camp. And so as we think about other people, how might we help other people get trained in how to do some of this virtual hiring that they normally would have had a person come into the JCC? Who'd like to take a stab at that?
I hate to do all the talking, but
I was
go
gonna say, I
ahead,
can
Jeremy,
take
please.
it. Okay, Jen. Well, you know what? Here's the deal, right? Is that this has been so new for all of us, and we've all just had to kind of like throw ourselves in and immerse it the best way that we can. So my recommendation has been to people on finding out ways to really learn how to be, I don't know, experts, if you will, at virtual recruiting and onboarding, et cetera, is to reach out to your individual HR networks and people networks to find out what other people are doing, what other kinds of programs they're using, if they're connecting with any other outside folks, whether it be consultants or subject matter experts or anything like that. There is a lot of information out there. And the other thing is just doing some Google research, right? Is just going in and putting some information in about, you know, best practices for, you know, virtual recruiting or virtual onboarding, et cetera. Because there have been a lot of people who have done some research and put that out there in the internet to help us understand that. If you're a member of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, you can always try to go to their website and be able to utilize that, you know, and to see what information they have. There's a lot of great new information they put out all the time. So I would say utilize your networks is the best. You know, I wish that I could say, oh, well, contact so-and-so because they do all of this, right? They'll train you on everything. Well, people are in the process, probably like Jen when they're starting their company, right? They're in the process of developing it right now because we know this isn't going away, but yet we don't necessarily have that fully formed at this point. So networking is one of the best ways that you can really do that and use your resources.
Great. Okay, we have another question. And you just hit on that a little bit, Jeremy. Do you think that that virtual hiring will stay even if we go back to all in-person work? What do each one of you think?
Well, you know, the stats out there are huge right now. Forbes just came out recently and said that they say by 2025, an estimated 70% of the workforce will be working remotely at least 5 days a month. So there's just a lot of information out there that's saying that this is going to continue. And even if everybody's not, you know, some people may be in the office, some may be out, this hybrid approach and this remote working environment, I mean, if you look at any of the data, is here to stay, which means that the recruiting piece of that will continue and the hiring piece of that, it's very convenient as people continue to embrace and get comfortable with it. So you know, obviously, we're betting on that based on the company we're involved with, but all the data is pointing to this being something that's going to stay with us for the future.
Much of the work that's being done at JCCs obviously is in person with our constituents and our users and our members, but there are still many positions that do work virtually, and I also believe that we'll continue to work virtually. So I think you're right there. Okay, let's see if we have another question here. What are the legal ramifications of recording a virtual interview, and what disclosure is necessary? Who wants to tackle that one? That's a great question.
Yes, it's definitely a big topic and something that is being reviewed by, you know, quite a bit. There are already a number of technologies out there that are not in the recruiting space, but that are doing just that thing where recordings are taking place. And there's usually a disclaimer where somebody is clicking saying, yes, I accept it. It is okay for me to actually be able to be recorded as we go. Now for the United States, I know we have at least one person in Canada on the call. And as we look globally, there are some different rules and regulations that go alongside with that. So it's something to keep in mind. But as long as you're asking, my understanding is you're asking permission and they are saying, yes, it's okay, an acknowledgement of that, then we're good.
Yeah, this is what I would say from an HR perspective. And I appreciate that, Jen, you're absolutely, because there's a lot of risk management that's associated with this, right? From an HR perspective, I will say it's scary, right? And it's scary who is doing this interview, right? If it's a hiring manager that is not well trained, doing a video interview with someone and they're recording it and they're asking questions that perhaps they shouldn't ask, is going to be a nightmare for you, because once that recording is recorded and that person has said what they said, guess what? It's there, right? And also, even if the hiring manager is good and they don't ask a lot of questions about that or ask any illegal questions or off limits questions, but the candidate starts to go on in the interview and starts to share a lot of personal information that we don't want to know, that we shouldn't know, and that they could come back and use that against us. And if it was recorded, they would say, yes, here's this. So it's really kind of tough. I encourage anyone who is thinking about doing video recording interviews or any of that, and we know there's companies out there that do it. It's out there. It's like, here's the questions, you record yourself, you send it back. I would definitely involve your legal counsel and get consultation before you engage in moving anything like this forward, and how you plan to handle all of this information. And if the legal counsel is prepared to be able to defend the organization if they're ever challenged from this standpoint. You know, that is the part for me as a, you know, live or die HR person, right? Is that that gives me heart palpitations, is that if someone is caught on camera and they're recorded, okay, oh, now we have evidence or whatever it is, right? That's why we always say, don't put it in writing, give me a phone call. Now we're doing that in an interview that's recorded. So there is risk management associated with that. I think you've got to have those open conversations in order to address it appropriately with the folks that you're, you know, you're working with in your organization.
And just to piggyback on that from the candidate experience, I know that I've done one virtual interview where it was recorded, and so that was their entire platform, and it was kind of like a screening interview. And so, like Jeremy is saying, there's no interviewee. They just sent you a question and you just put yourself in front of a camera and you answer that question as if you were actually talking to someone and sending that in. So I think that's a much safer route from the candidate's perspective, because there's no interaction and the candidate is agreeing to, you know, interview in that style than just having a Zoom call like this and pressing record. So if you're thinking about doing it, maybe look into some of that technology.
And I would just add, I think, because we tried several different things initially, and we found that virtual hiring, our candidates craved the personal interaction. And so instead of recording interviews, we just did meetings like this. So all of our recruiters do a Zoom or a Teams, or if the person doesn't have access to any of that, we've done FaceTime or even phone interviews. So we still keep that personal touch, even though it adds a little bit more time and a little bit more effort. It has helped improve our show rate, because that's the other piece. You know, we've interviewed, we've offered, and then people don't feel that belonging with the organization, and we saw fall off that was higher than normal. So the personal touch has seemed to help us with that fall off between offer and start. But we don't record them. We just record. We have an electronic interview guide that the person takes notes and enters that data in, but not a recorded interview.
And I also think it's important for us to remember that while we are going into people's homes to interview them, so you can see what's behind me and I can see what's behind you, and that unintentional bias can come into play if you see a toddler running by and you think for a moment, how is this person going to work when they're distracted by their toddler? That can never come into any kind of HR hiring or interviewing or onboarding. So we have to be careful and check ourselves in how we're dealing with seeing what someone is in their own home environment.
You know, conversely, there's also some advantages to that. For one thing, you know, people are recording everything. And so we're concerned maybe as organizations about, oh, what about recording? the candidates may very well also be doing their own recording, and having coaching for your interviewers and having consistency by doing things like ensuring that you've got questions that are consistent and that are asked in the right way. And you're asking the same questions for every candidate that's going through the same role can actually really increase the lack of bias, or it can help those interviewers, as I mentioned before, uncover some unconscious bias that they may have by creating that sort of structure. So for your interviewers and interviewing team, I can't recommend enough the importance of really being able to build that in to offset some of the challenges that we all have.
That's true, Jen. And I also think that what you told us the story about the man that you were talking with and the child came in with the candy bar.
Yeah.
That shows us that candidate didn't get rattled. And in many cases, the people that we're hiring, we want them at JCCs to not get rattled, to be able to pivot, to be able to have a child ask a question and derail them for a moment and then come back to the work that we do, which we all know at JCCs, there's loads of different things that happen at a JCC that derail you and then you can get back into it. So that's a great story. Okay, so I see our time is time for me to send this back to Mark, and then we're going to go into our breakout room. So Mark, take over.
I am unmuted.
There you
See,
go.
I knew that. Okay, unmute myself. There you go. I'm going to keep everyone else on spotlight because we're going to go into breakouts. It is about 2:52 in the Eastern time zone. We're going to breakouts for about 20 minutes. And all of you hopefully have an updated version of Zoom, a reasonably updated version of Zoom. Once I open the breakout rooms, you'll be able to choose which breakout room to go to. And each one is titled with the topic and the speaker. And what's nice, you can think about this as if we were in a conference room. If you don't have to be in the same breakout room for all 20 minutes, although we encourage you to have a robust conversation, you can move from room to room. Joy or myself will be in the main room throughout this time if you need assistance. There won't necessarily be a JCC Association person in one of the breakout rooms. It'll be your facilitator and all of you. So, they're going to share with you some additional information, but also this is a time for robust conversation. When we come back at around 3:13, 3:15 Eastern, we have some time for us to really hear from you and just to talk as a group. What have we learned? What have we gained? What questions do we still have? And then, of course, we have some announcements as well before we hit 3:30. So we hope you stick with us for the next 35 minutes or so. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms, and you should be able to choose which breakout room to go to. Does everyone see that? Yes, and I'm going to ask the presenters to go to the room that has their name. Let's see. Joy, do you see that? Oh, okay, I think people are starting to go. Excellent. So I see people are starting to enter the rooms. Perfect.
Sorry, Mark, all I see is a list of participants.
If you scroll down, you may see a list. If you scroll down, you'll see the rooms. Or if you just,
oh, there you go.
if you take where it says, you're a co-host, Joy, so it looks a little bit different for you.
Okay.
But where it says unassigned, just minimize that and you'll be able to see the 4 rooms.
Got it. And
So
Jen, can you see where you're supposed to go? You're muted. Unmute yourself, Jen. Oh, she's gone. Good.
Great. Okay, so I see about most folks have gone into the room. Some folks may not be in front of their computer at the moment, but you should be able to go into breakout rooms. And I'm starting to see we have folks in every room now. We have folks with Crystal. We have folks with Jeff. We have folks with Jeremy. And we have some folks, Jeremy, Crystal, and we have a couple of folks with Jen as well. Great. So what we're going to do here in the main room is that I'm going to pause the recording. And in about 7 seconds, Joy, we'll see a whole bunch of people come back and the floor will be yours. And we'll stay in gallery view, I think. Here we go. Here's everybody.
Look at that. I love when that number continues to scroll up and you see more and more people joining, and look at all these wonderful, fabulous faces. I don't know if you can tell, but I love HR people. I think you're amazing and you do such wonderful work supporting all of the JCC staff. So yes, give yourself a clap on the square that you're in. That's right, Kelly. Good job. I love it. Okay. Well, I hope that you enjoyed your time in your small little breakout rooms and you learned more information about each individual group that you chose to be in. We're going to open up the floor right now, but don't unmute yourself. You can use the down at the bottom. There's a thing that looks like reactions. And you can raise your hand there if there's anything that you would like to say. We would love to hear what you talked about, something that inspired you, something you learned, some new information, anything like that. So we'll take a look at what we're going to, I'm going to keep scrolling through and see who has their hand raised, and then I'll call on you to unmute yourself. And I know that this can be a talkative group. Kelly C. from Milwaukee, unmute yourself and let's hear from you.
Hi, thanks. So I just wanted to share something that Crystal actually just shared in our breakout room, which I thought was a really good reminder to me, and hopefully it is to all of you that didn't get to be a part of that breakout group, about just making sure that the requirements that you have on your job postings are actual requirements. I do think it made me think I need to go look through all of our job postings right now to make sure that we are saying things are preferred if they're not actually required, or maybe removing them altogether because they aren't truly required for the job. And Crystal shared that a study showed that especially women will not apply for a job if they don't meet 100% of the qualifications. And I think as I know across the country are looking for early childhood teachers, that we're going to find ourselves in a bad situation if we're asking for more in that job posting than what we actually need to have for the job. So thank you, Crystal. And I just wanted to share with the group too.
Thank you, Kelly. Who else has something that they'd like to add that they heard or that it piqued their interest, they want to know more about? I'm sure there's lots of questions running around in your heads. Angie.
One of the discussions that kind of came up in our group towards the end there was just the challenge of getting buy-in from hiring managers in the onboarding process. So how do you make sure that everybody's dedicating the time that they need for those investment of staff? So it seemed to be a challenge across the board.
Thank you, Andrew, for raising that. Does anybody have any insights into how to do that? How to get that investment in time?
Boy, this is Christine O'Rourke at the JCC in Rochester. This year, we are actually including onboarding of staff as part of the budgeting process. And it has been something that has been difficult for me to get buy-in to because it's not something that is budgeted. You know, the extra time that it takes to bring people on to be onboarded, and that the extra training that's required. And I find that that's helping to start a less combative dialogue about how this becomes an investment and how we plan for that. And I think that's a good start.
Is anyone else doing something similar to that? Any insights into how you're handling a lot of the onboarding? Isabel, I see your hand up.
Well, we're blowing up our onboarding. I mean, it's very much a work in process. And luckily, we're not hiring 15 people tomorrow. But we're really going to look at breaking it down, really, and dividing and conquering. So not one person other than me probably will own it, so that we kind of share it, and the facilities manager will make sure they get a tour, whatever. And so we're hoping that will take some pressure off department managers feeling like they've got to dedicate 5 days to this person. So we'll see, but it's a thought.
Terrific. Thank you. I see Beth Greenberg. Unmute yourself, please.
Hi there. I wanted to share that we went through a process about 1.5 years ago and really looking at reevaluating how we do our onboarding process. And there were 2 tools that we created that I think our supervisors and our new hires have really found helpful. One is that we created an onboarding handbook, one for the new hires, and they get that with their offer letter. We made it very cute. It sort of was an airplane theme with a travel, and it walked them through what they can expect in their first 90 days with the agency and who would be responsible for what, so that they would have just a nice understanding of that. At the same time, whenever a hiring supervisor shares that they have an opening, and especially a full-time opening, we share a similarly created handbook for hiring supervisors. And it's from the perspective of the hiring supervisor, what HR's role is, what their role is, what are the areas of the organization they should be setting up trainings with, et cetera. And so they get that as well as a template. We've played with all different kinds of formats for this, but a template that ultimately looks like an Excel spreadsheet, but it blocks out certain kinds of elements of what a new hire would have to have, whether it's logistics, whether it's people to meet, whether it's meetings to schedule for themselves, whether it's board people to meet, et cetera. And I think we're finding the supervisors are finding that helpful. We try and give it to them early enough that they're not doing that the day before they start. And then as the HR business partner, I work with them to fine tune that plan, to make sure they've covered everything. They've thought of all the different elements. We have things on there like when we were in person, it was who's going to take this person to lunch. If it's not a team lunch, is there one person dedicated? Now I'm suggesting virtual happy hours, where maybe the first day the team gets together at 4 o'clock, everybody brings a snack or something to drink, and all you talk about is introducing each other, and it's all personal. And I think people are finding that helpful. So that's where we're at right now with that. But I'm looking forward to new ways of tweaking that, and as we continue to move in a virtual space, how we can continue to make that effective.
Thank you, Beth. That's great. I think one of the things that Jeremy had said was trying to make it fun, building relationships. People are so excited the day before they start their job. And then we shove a whole bunch of papers at them and we tell them to sit behind a computer, and they don't know what the heck just happened. They thought they were getting this amazing job, and now we're bogging them down with all this stuff. So how do we continue to embrace them, bring them into our world, and really get to know them? So thank you for doing that, Beth. And I think I saw somebody else's hands up. The hand went down. I didn't mean to scare you. Okay, Angela.
Sorry, this doesn't have, really anything to do with what we've kind of been talking about. I'm brand new HR for the JCC here in San Diego. And it's my first nonprofit. So I've come from a couple of very large companies. And so it's been a little bit of an adjustment. And one thing I noticed is we are using ADP for a payroll standpoint, but we are not using the HRIS function. And so everything is so manual that I'm shocked. I'm actually flabbergasted at how much time it spends to get even one person into ADP, into all the different things. I've never seen anything like this. Nothing is integrated. Is any of my fellow HRs, do any of you guys use ADP and use the HRIS function on ADP to kind of integrate that? Because right now that's what I'm looking into, because we're killing so much time just manually doing so much repetitive work.
Angela, Tracy raised her hand. She's using it.
I might reach
Hi,
out.
Angela. Hi, I was just typing to you in the chat, but definitely let's connect.
Okay.
And I can share some of the fabulous things and not so fabulous, but yes. And welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
Yes,
welcome.
I'll just add Michelle from the Mandel JCC in Cleveland, Ohio. She couldn't raise her hand, but she uses ADP and she can help you as well, Angela. So you have multiple support.
Thank you. What was Michelle's last name?
Michelle Eisenberg. We'll make sure you guys connect.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Got it.
Okay, so I see we're coming to the end of our time together. I just wanted to mention something. We're talking about connecting. Well, on the Spot Me platform, there's a way that you can see all of the attendees and you can send each other chats. And there's also something that's called J Cafe, that Mark's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the things that are coming up. But J Cafe is tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock. And it's sort of like these virtual rooms where you can get together and just meet up with somebody and chat with them. So those are two ways that we've sort of built into the conference, ways that you can be in touch with each other. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you for final announcements.
Yes, and please don't go anywhere because I have a few important things to say. But the first thing is, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Crystal. Can everyone just give a round of applause, or you can put a virtual hand raise. They did this out of the goodness of their own hearts as volunteer leaders within the Society of Human Resources Management, and they gave us such a wealth of information. You can contact them on Spot Me or through their email, and everything that the PowerPoints as well as the recording of the main session and their emails and their documents that they want to send to me will be posted on Spot Me in the next couple of weeks. So this will all be available to you. Some closing announcements. Our next peer community session will be tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern Daylight Time. The Zoom link is in the schedule, just like you did this one. The Zoom link, go to your schedule tomorrow, 12:30, find the HR session. You can put it in your personal schedule. It will be on equity in hiring with our wonderful colleague and friend, Sarah Shapiro-Plevin, who's the founder and CEO of the Gender Equity in Hiring Project, working specifically with the Jewish community. Check your agenda. We hope to see you there tomorrow. A quick reminder, the virtual vendor hall is open today from 4 to 5, and again on Thursday from 1:45 to 2:45, all Eastern. During these times, sponsors will be available for live, engaging, and informative video breakouts. Again, they're the reason we can offer this to you for free, so please go visit them. You'll see product demos and have an opportunity to ask questions as well. If you have a trusted advising session, there's over 100 participants that are getting half an hour with a trusted advisor. Those are at 4 and 4:30 today, or 1:45 and 2:15 on Thursday. If you have one, you do. It will be in your personal schedule already on Spot Me with the link to connect, and please be on time because you don't have that much time. You have a half an hour. Two more things. JCC Cares is our first ever continental service opportunity that's going to take place today, 5:15 to 6:15 Eastern, 2:15 to 3:15 Pacific. Everyone is welcome to join. There are two options. We're partnering with Repair the World to offer two ways where you and your colleagues can do virtual service live together as a movement. One is it's called the Neighbor Network, and we'll be actually calling seniors that are based in Manhattan, pre-screening them if they want to receive regular calls for support so they don't feel so isolated. I've done this. It is such a heartwarming direct service experience, and it'll be amazing when hundreds of us get to do it together. Or there's a second one, which I'll actually be facilitating with our friends at Repair the World and Vax Volunteers. It will be searching online for volunteer opportunities so folks can help people get vaccines. And we're at this critical point now where we need to not only get vaccines to the people who want it, but get vaccines to the people who are not necessarily rushing, but need to get them as well. So 5:15, we hope to see you and your colleagues at either one of the sessions. There, if you scroll down to the bottom of your agenda for today, Tuesday, you'll see both options. They're two separate sessions. So click one for Neighbor Network or click the other for Vax Volunteers. Lastly, before you sign on to the peer community session tomorrow, you can connect with colleagues to kickstart your day with a mindful motivator at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. It's 15 minutes. You get to choose one of a few options to set your intention for the day and prepare and bring your whole self. For those of you that know my work in J-Response, I'm all about mindfulness and taking a pause so we can get ready and go do our day smartly. And you'll be able to choose between meditation, movement, or goal setting. It's no more than 10 minutes, and they're sponsored by our sponsor, Les Mills, instructors from Les Mills. I think that's it. It's 3:30. Thank you so much for joining us. What a wonderful HR community. And we hope to see you throughout ProCon, including at our 12:30 session tomorrow. And thank you again to our speakers and presenters. And thank you to Joy.